Alright folks, this is Dub Crank here again, coming at you. Today I'm going to do a discussion on capitalism. My views are not for capitalism, so I'm going to talk about obviously things that I don't believe in with capitalism, and discuss some of the aspects, concepts, and experiences of capitalism. And as always, this is my opinion I'm sharing with you, and there will be, of course, facts and experiences relayed, but this is the opinion of myself. So, capitalism. Now, before I get into my points about it, I'm going to read a couple descriptions, generic descriptions off of the internet for your benefit and for mine. And I'm just going to do two short ones. One I think is from Google and the other one is from Wikipedia. The first one from Google says that capitalism, an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. Now, I don't agree 100% with that definition, but I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to read the second one. So under Wikipedia definition, capitalism is an economic system based on the private ownership of the means and production in their operation for profit. Characteristics central to capitalism include private property, capital accumulation, wage labor, voluntary exchange, a price system, and competitive markets. So those are two generic definitions, and going back to the first one, the part that I didn't necessarily agree with was where they say that it says the country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. Now that may be a description and kind of an idea of how it's supposed to be laid out, but I think the reality, at least in the market that I've grown up in and only lived in, which is America, United States of America, it doesn't really execute that way in my opinion. I mean, even if that's the way it was started, that it's controlled by private owners, there's so much involvement with the government and with each state as a part of cooperation with capitalism that it's pretty much synonymous. You know, it's not something where you're gonna, in my experience, it's not something where you're gonna see private businesses only practicing capitalism and it's completely separate from states or government. That's not the case. That's not what I've seen. They all work hand in hand together, and one is for the other and vice versa, and so it just kind of works out to the same, because I mean it's an accepted system. So, and when they say in the description rather than by state, they mean by government. So in other places of the world that practice capitalism, it might just be one government. Here in the United States we have multi-states within a government, a federal government. So that's the generic description. So now I'm going to talk about, let's see, I got about 10 points and then a closing that I like to talk about. So number one, communism and capitalism, in my opinion, are twins. Capitalism is communism's albino twin. It looks better, but it's the same thing. Capitalism bases everything on money, on wealth, and those who hold all the wealth hold all the power. And when you think of power, it isn't just about money or material ownership. Power also has to do with education, communication, freedom, healthcare, protection, or security. So those are two things that I think of. I mean, if you had a choice where you're going to live and one was communist and one was capitalism, I would recommend living in capitalism. It's is definitely better than communism, but in a lot of ways it's not that much further of a distance, especially when you look at corruption. So number two, it is possible for capitalism to exist fairly, but highly unlikely in only very small populations. And this is because, like democracy, once you have a larger than a few, say, tribes, combined, then the power division intensifies. The gap between haves and have-nots begins to grow. So, in my opinion, it might be something that works in something that's smaller, population of people. And that's the same way I feel about democracy. It only works in a smaller, population. There are things that could be different to make it work in a larger population, but it's not realistic to have those things in order to make that work. It's almost like, taking a car sitting on the bottom of the ocean for how many decades and then wanting to rebuild it when it might be easier just to start with something else, Okay, so number three, holding power with few and with rich. Now, capitalism gives up old versions of power when those versions are either A, obsolete, or B, serve a direct or efficient function for the leaders of capitalism. In other words, when the mass of public involvement can serve capitalism's whole, and as an example, cars started out for the rich, we had automobiles, then letting everyone own one helps create capitalist wealth, and it helps the regeneration of that wealth and gives complacency to what Americans, citizens, or you might call slaves. Now, other examples, this is point number 4, other examples of this include television, radio, education, and book publishing. And in whole and largely, these communication mediums have been privatized by the holders of capitalism. However, over what amounts to the equivalent of centuries, it's not really centuries, but it really seems that way, these mediums are gradually loosened up. Yet we still see the main routes of communication hoarded by capitalist leaders. And in communism, the news, ads that you see, communication, and laws are beliefs, and beliefs are controlled by the state or government. And in capitalism, it's very similar, as television, education, radio, and now the internet are tightly hoarded to those same few that hold the power. Book publishing has always been reserved for the rich, not just as a luxury, but as a way of giving favorable bias to the capitalist rich, as well as maintaining control over the information, same as in communism. You got that control pattern. And things such as patents, like when you get something that you want to, copyright, also copyrights, business entrepreneurship, and other examples of those are also part of capitalist bias and that same power holding pattern. And by that I mean, those are traditionally accessible only to the rich, and you have to be quite rich, and that kind of keeps it separate from people, the same way that the justice system in the United States keeps the law and justice away from poor people by making it a sale item, a commodity, like a material that you have to purchase. So let's see here. Now there's also land, media, rights, and values, and these are the things that capitalism controls to maintain rich power over the poor. If you have proprietorship, or you're the one that's holding all of those items, land, media, rights, and values, then you pretty much can dictate and say and do what you want. So I'm moving on to point number 5. Capitalism teaches everyone to do great things, only doing these great things for money. Capitalism teaches everyone that only wealth is value. that only materialism has value in that wealth, and that no amount of wisdom, education, experience, or health matter without wealth. That's what they teach you. So I'm going to read that again. Capitalism teaches everyone to do great things only for money. Capitalism teaches everyone that only wealth is value, that only materialism has value, and no amount of wisdom, education, experience, or health matter without wealth. And as an example, you could try going to the doctor without health insurance, see how that works. You could try exercising your freedom, quote, freedom and justice rights by defending yourself in an American court of law. Let's see how that works for you. And that will give you some experience about that point that I'm talking about. And by that I mean the wealthy get to exercise those rights because they can buy them, and the rest of us do not. So moving on to point 6. Capitalism teaches everyone to become a cutthroat society. There's no room for artists without money, no room for humanitarianism without corporate sponsorship and or product selling. So under capitalism, we are led to believe that somehow a capitalist society is not a caveman era, but it is just that, a caveman existence. In prehistoric times, in tribal living or an uncivilized existence, and I should put a quantifier on there that not all non-traditional existences are uncivilized, but for the sake of my example, I'm just using that generically. But in those prehistoric times or in tribes and things, there may be no protection, you may have no laws, you may have no rules, and no fairness or equality or justice. Yet in a capitalist society, it is no different. But you're told that it is different. You're told that it's civilized and that you have those things, and that's what capitalism gives you. That's what you're led to believe. Power is held by a few in capitalism. Laws, rules, and morals and values also held and enforced by the few. Industry, media, sales are all regulated to maintain control and power for the few. Your justice or freedom is bought. You purchase that. Not a right, as capitalists would have you believe. In capitalism, everyone is guilty unless he or she can purchase their freedom, their innocence, and equality. These things are never given to citizens for free. They must be bought. That's always been the history of the United States of America. So, number 7, capitalism's core value and belief is that you, not rich people, but you owe them, the rich people. That's their belief. Yeah, it goes back to, almost back to the same thing with manifest destiny in the Constitution. So you owe them, and that your money that you make has to be given up. That's part of the belief system of capitalism. And that your time, attention, and freedom belong to capitalism. And as an example, advertising, commercials, a stock market economy that bases the health of the economy on materialism. So basically that point number 7, I'll kind of re-explain that. So in capitalism, because of the way the values are set up, they expect you to spend your money, and it creates a system. That's how they use it. So they always expect that it's their right to have your money. That's the way it's set up. And so when you exist here as a citizen in America, you're going to be subject to just an incredible, massive onslaught of advertising and commercials everywhere you go in your face. And there's no regulation for this. There's nothing that says that you have a right to exist without this in your face. You know, it's soliciting basically. And so, you know, if you're going anywhere, walking, bicycling, or driving your car, capitalism doesn't believe you have the right to be able to see. I mean, they put banners, commercial signs, everything they can everywhere in front of you, and so that you forcibly have to get around those things to get to wherever you're going. And they believe that that's their right, that you don't, it's not up to you to say that you don't have to have that way. And it's also the same thing, of course, everybody knows with television, and YouTube is terrible with this. They feel that it's also their right to force you to look at anybody's product or sales or viewpoint and have to subscribe and have to purchase that. And now we're seeing a society in America that's going more and more towards those points with smartphones, because now all the tracking and all the what do you call it? You know, the program information that they get on every citizen and individual, so that they can target their advertising to you. That's all increasing more and more and more, and that's just going to continue to increase, in my opinion, and get worse. Another example is how it decays and destroys society, in my opinion, is, for example, riding the city bus. I've ridden the city bus all my life, living in the city I live in, and you know, it used to be a better experience because when you rode the bus, you at least, you didn't have anything to do because you weren't driving the vehicle, but you at least could look out the window, enjoy the scenery, see different sights, maybe even learn routes of the city. You know, this is where this street is. You know, get some geographic information. Just have a better experience riding the bus. You know, sunlight comes in, you can see out, you feel better. Creates a better ridership experience. And at some point, the city decided, hey, you know, if we can put signs and advertisements and billboards on the lower half of the bus, you know, we can make more money. And they put it inside too, but they started putting banners on the sides of the bus where the windows weren't. And then, as I've talked about, where it's getting worse and worse in America, then again, at some point, then they took it a step further and said, hey, wait a minute, why don't, when the technology advanced to those decals for the sides of vehicles, they said, why don't we just cover the whole bus, windows and everything? And so they've been doing that for at least a decade, maybe even a couple decades, I don't know, but that's been going on for a long time. And what happens is that destroys that rider positive experience. So now when you ride the bus, you can see out. It's not like the windows are blacked out or anything, but it's much less than half. You know, if you were to say it was reduced by 50%, I wouldn't say that that's true. It's reduced probably about 80%, in my opinion, maybe even more. And as far as you being able to see out of the windows, if you're a rider. And so that destroys that experience, positive experience riding the bus. Keeps everybody in a closed environment, you know, makes it more claustrophobic. It ruins the experience. Now, instead of people focusing maybe on what's outside, they're focusing on everybody inside the bus. You know, it might create more constriction and conflicts. But I know for myself, it's definitely made the experience of riding the bus a lot worse, because now, you know, I used to enjoy, I'm just a dreamer, as I've always been that way as a kid. When I drive in car or ride in cars as a boy, I always like to look out the window. I like to see the scenery, see what's going on. And plus I get a feeling of relaxation when I feel like I'm not stuck in a box and I can see out and things. So, and that's all done in the name of capitalism. You know, they want to make that maximum profit, just like the billboards that are right in front of your face wherever you go, anywhere in the city. It's almost like that billboard that follows you, you know, just changes, you know. You're over here, now we're in your face. You're over at this store, now we're in your face. You're going to McDonald's, wait a minute, we'll get over there and get in your face, you know. And now you got it at gas pumps. You're sitting there filling up your gas, the TV screen turns on, and somebody starts yelling at you about buying their product. So that's one example with the bus, the city bus, and how they did that. And I think that was a terrible idea. And as far as I know, that's not going to change, and it's just going to continue to get worse. But even though that's just a bus, you can tie that into everything that you see around the United States with capitalism and how it strips everybody's rights to have a quality, healthy life. You know, it's because capitalism doesn't believe in that. It doesn't believe that you deserve life or that you deserve freedom. What its value is that you're a slave for a system, you know, for a queen ant. And just like the description I talked about before, where it said it's for private industries, that's not, in my opinion, that's not true. You're also serving the state or the government through capitalism. So, that's my explanation on point 7 about that you owe them, the few that are in charge of capitalism. And you know, the whole stock market is supposed to be the the core of the United States functioning, capitalism with the economy. And that whole stock market is based on material items. That's the whole thing. It's good if the materials sell, it's bad if the materials don't, which translates to stocks of those materials. So now we'll go on to point number 8. My opinion, capitalism and America are different things, but they're currently parallel, that's true, but they're separate things still. Capitalism is a disguised state rule society, or dictatorship, if you want to call it that. And America also has its own values outside of capitalism. That's why I think that the two are separate. However, often American law parallels capitalism and vice versa. But for example, there are differences such as the American leaders' creed, and mottos. And those are the things of the United States that they practice, the leaders practice and live by, the political leaders. Whether they say them or they're written down or not, doesn't matter. These are the things I've experienced and seen in my life, and it's just been a part of capitalism. So, as I said, these are creeds, things that the leaders live by, whether they state them or not. They're in their practice and their mottos. And first one is, and I'm quoting what I'm saying is the creeds or the mottos. Never do unto me as I do unto you. That's a big one. The United States leaders always practice that. From them to you as a citizen. Never do unto them as they do unto you. That's one of their creeds, American leaders. The second one, quote unquote, I will always redraw the line if and when the line is working against me, or if and when the line is benefiting you in ways not originally anticipated, unquote. So those are different statements, but essentially saying the same thing. And that's saying, quote, the rules must by majority benefit me more than you, unquote. And regarding Constitution interpretation of laws, quote, we set things up to benefit ourselves greater than benefiting you. But if we made error and it works in your favor, or it otherwise holds us accountable to your same accountability level, in such cases, then we have the right to change laws and rules to reverse this, unquote. So basically, and as I said, those are all my words. Basically, what I'm talking about is, if we go back to the top of the creeds and mottos, the first one, never do unto me as I do unto you. That's practiced all the time in American society. Most people will know it as when you see people who aren't held accountable for the law, whether it's police officers or it's anybody in the administrative judicial system of the law, and of course politicians and Congress. Everybody's seen or learned, experienced situations or times, even big huge time frames of American history, where those things are very obvious, where the instigators or leaders of capitalism don't have to follow the same rules that you and me do. That's what that means. Never do unto me as I do unto you. So they can put laws on you that you have to follow, or you are either murdered or lose all your freedom, but those laws don't work in reverse against them. And even if you find where they are written down in a statement, in a law book, you know that there's ways that they do to get out of that, so they're not prosecuted for it. And they'll come up with different jargon and terms to do that, or methods. So that's the first part of the creed being re-explained. Now, the second one that I talked about, I will always redraw the line if and when the line is working against me, or if and when the line is benefiting you in ways not originally anticipated. So I've seen that in American history where, the Constitution, the way everything is set up, is there's supposed to be all these laws to help create a society, but it's often the case that the law will, if there's a chance that someone could start having more freedom or getting more you know, opportunities, then the law, they tend to look at that. They try to find out ways to change all that. You know, taxation is a big example of that. Taking people's money away for generic and undisclosed purposes, and then using that money out, put it in their pockets, and then using it for their own discretionary purposes, and not letting people see where that money goes or what they're using it for. It helps maintain their power. So they always redraw lines around that, you know. So if there's something that changes, like, you know, smartphones, those are new. They'll come up with new laws. The internet, that's new. They'll come up with new laws, ways of controlling that, and not letting people get any real benefit or any real freedom on there. I mean, another example is the internet. It started out as a free, unregulated system, and as it's gone on now and stayed around, then now they've already instigated new laws in the federal government and in states that take away your right to have access to the internet, that take away your right to have the same speed of the information that you receive on the internet as somebody who's rich. So basically they set up a system and said, well, we'll just start giving the high speed, charging more and giving that to people who can afford it, and then we'll give the lower speeds to the regular people, or to the stuff that's free. So they start separating it like that. And they also start changing laws about what's your right as far as privacy, and that's a terrible area. It's getting beat to death right now, as far as, like, if you were that area, you're losing that fight if you're an American citizen. Just think of Facebook and different things like that, how many rights people have lost and it's been taken away from them. So that's that second point of those mottos. They'll redraw the line to make it work for them, or if it starts benefiting you, then they'll redraw it too. And keep in mind, those are things that if any time as an American citizen or in the history, if you try to redraw those lines, it's basically like trying to go to the moon without a spaceship. You know, it's not going to happen, and the people in charge of capitalism are going to make sure it stays that way, and that you don't have that kind of ability. Just like when the economy started going bad, one of the first things they did was change, I don't know if this was a federal law or if it was a state law. I know it was at least probably a state, in my state, at least a state law, but they changed the law so that now all the costs and fees and everything associated with getting justice through the court system, you know, and filling out paperwork and filing formal actions and things like that that you would do if you were trying to, you know, get your rights enforced, they just, like, you know, more than quadrupled those, you know, when the economy started going bad, just to, as a solution to deal with not being able to handle everybody, you know, in their system, you know, coming for justice. So if you got, you know, 2,500 people coming to you to use your court system, and then the economy goes bad, and now you've got 7,500 people knocking on your door, and you don't want to deal with that, or it's going to make you have to work hard. A solution is to just quadruple or more the price of everything, and now you just eliminate a lot of those people because they can't have access to it. And that's the number one form of denial. That's not I'm not into that talk today about discrimination in America. That's for another talk. But just to mention that that is the number one form of denial. Number one form of discrimination in America is denial of service, and the key way that a government or system or a state does that is by price. You know, keeping you locked out of access to things. Yeah. So let's see. Then the last one was the rules must by majority benefit me, which is I'm speaking as a Congress, so I'm saying the rules must by majority benefit me more than they benefit you, the citizen. And that's true, and that kind of goes back to my first point about never do unto me as I do unto you. It's kind of the same thing. And yeah, so that whole point kind of reiterates the first one. So I hope I've explained that section of points in number 8, you know, clear enough. So we'll move on to number 9. And this is just a point I wanted to make. that I thought of while I was writing down these points, which is that Einstein, Albert Einstein, the famous scientist that everybody knows about, E equals mc squared. Einstein was strongly opposed to capitalism. I don't know if you knew that or not. I didn't know that until I learned it several years ago. And just a quick mention of that, as well as the fact that all American scientists, they form off of Einstein's teaching, and you'll see that when you listen to them talk about their theories or their education or their discoveries. They'll mention Einstein, and they quote, as I said, they quote Einstein, they'll cite Einstein and reference Einstein in all aspects of scientific discovery and education in general, not just in the area that Einstein was specific in. American leaders recognize Einstein as an American genius, a prodigy unto our Constitution and development as a nation. You've heard that throughout history. That just continues because he was a genius. Yet these same leaders just quote-unquote happen to disregard Einstein's teaching, his papers, and his talks, because he did talks where he warned everyone about the inherent dangers and inherent corruption at the core of capitalism, revealed how capitalism won't work. He was warning everyone that it will lead to bad things. That part of Einstein's genius just tends to slip the American leaders' minds, coincidentally. I kind of liken that to saying that if there was a rule that somebody was telling you and they said, okay, we're asking you, you get to choose what your own pay rate should be, and so we need a vote. We'll accept whatever you say, because like you're in power, let's say. So we're asking you, should you be allowed to give yourself your own pay rate or decide what your pay rate should be? And we need a vote, yes or no. And what a lot of people would choose in that, I think it becomes pretty obvious. And Einstein's teachings, like I said, those just happen to slip the minds of everybody in capitalism, but his teachings get quote-unquote lost because remembering and honoring his teachings about anti-capitalism would mean the equivalent of voting, no, I don't think I should choose my own pay rate. So, it's basically that the American leaders, quote-unquote, forget Einstein's anti-capitalism teachings, because if they had to acknowledge them and conduct a society based off of his learnings and teachings and facts, then that would be the same as them saying, no, we shouldn't be the ones to say what our own pay rate should be. And that's just a part of human nature too. I mean, it's kind of like if you've ever had to exercise or you've had to do something that you're supposed to do or you should do as a human being, but you don't want to do. And so if you don't have to, you're not going to do it. And that's kind of the same thing. Once people are in power in capitalism, those few, even if they're intelligent enough, conscientious enough to understand that it's not right for them to have all the wealth or all the control, they're not going to give it up, willingly. And not even if you say you'd be a better human being or you'd help this 50 million people over here be able to eat food. If you didn't, they're still not going to do it. So that's a part of human nature, but you have to understand that and realize that when you run a nation, that's what people are going to do. Just like the laws that the leaders create that say, hey, if somebody leaves the door unlocked and it's a bank, we know before it even happens that people are going to go in there and try to steal the money. So they're already telling you what your behavior is. And so they come up with rules and laws. That's against the law, and we need to lock this. And it's the same thing. It works the other way around too, I mean, it's not like human nature disappears when you become a member of Congress. I mean, they do the same thing. If they're allowed to decide their own pay and they're allowed to say, we get to choose what's fair and what's not fair, then they're going to be like the person who takes the money when nobody's looking. They're going to do it. Okay, so number 10 Uh, Human rights are abolished under capitalism simply because wealth is the measure of correct versus incorrect under capitalism. So with capitalism, if you have wealth, you are correct, or if you want to call it successful. And if you don't have wealth, you are incorrect or a failure. In any society that does this, it means that money is the measure of reward and punishment. So for example, if you are given water, let's say, as a basic measure of human rights, meaning that, you're a human being, you have to have water to survive. So we're going to give you that water because it would be wrong for us to have it and say, no, you can't have it. But anyway, so for example, if you are given water as a basic measure of human rights, and if it costs money to provide you with that water, which usually does, cities pay money to provide you with running water in your sink and your taps, then what we see in America is under a society that uses money as a measure, when any need arises for punishment, that money measure society, in other words, a society that uses money as a measurement, will remove providing water to you. And they will cite the cost of the water as a quote-unquote reward to you. So by us giving you this water, we're rewarding you. They don't see it as a basic human right. And I've seen this over and over again in American capitalism, removing basic human rights simply because there does not exist any standard in capitalism that recognizes human rights. Under capitalism, every cost benefit is considered a reward. Another example is a woman I worked with. She was a single working mother, with a child. And when she failed, let me scroll my notes here. When she failed to satisfy the procedural paperwork timeframes or contract rules or specific criteria of the state or county program requirements, which is where she was receiving her benefit through the county, she was punished by removal of her daycare financial assistance. So let's just talk about that before I continue on. So that, what that means is that if it's decided that, because when they come up with a program like that, that gives that type of assistance, and they set a guideline for that, that means that anybody who meets that program's guidelines has a need. And that means that money's been set aside because that need is it's a basic human need. Now, that varies a little. I mean, there's things in programs that aren't requirements of human rights or human needs in some areas of programs. But, most of the stuff that goes through those programs is focused on basic, rights like shelter costs, food, heat, health care, transportation, things like that. So like this woman, the single mother, if somebody has demonstrated the need for that, then that means that's something that they have to have in order to survive. I mean, if this mother has to, let's just use her as example, it's still, if she has to work in order to survive, to make her ends meet, and she has a child and she can't take her child with her, and she can't afford daycare because it's too expensive, then you've got a problem. If she needs to have this job, then she needs a way of having her child being taken care of while she's working. And if that's been determined that that's not something she can afford on the salary she's getting, then that means it can't happen. If she has to do it on her own, the need won't be met. And so if she qualifies for that, then she's qualified. Then that's period. That's the end of the discussion. That's the end of the statement, And you can't come in, whether you're a state or a government, to a program like that and take liberties and believe that you have access to the cookie jar and think that you can say, well, we don't like this or that about this individual's behavior regarding our benefits distributed to this individual. So as a punishment for what we don't like, we're going to remove this basic need. And that's where it's illegal. That's where you're breaking the law. They don't have the right, even though they're under the responsible ownership of the program and of its funds. They don't hold the right to do something like that in a case like that. I'm sure, other examples where it may be valid if somebody's cheating the system or something to remove the program, because then they don't qualify. But if somebody's qualified and you just don't like the way they cross their T's or dot their I's or something, and you're the county, that's a good example of when you have a system in a nation or a state, and there's a strong need for an oppositional power. Because it's just like if you're a parent, you got 2 kids and they're fighting. I mean, the fighting's not going to stop, and it's going to continue. And there needs to be a stronger oppositional power that comes in the middle and breaks this up and says, look, this isn't going to happen. And that's the same thing. Like when that program yanks her funding for something they don't like, and she's still qualified, you need to have an oppositional equal or greater power that steps in, puts its foot in the middle and says, look, we don't really care, Mr. or Mrs. County, what your personal feelings or liberties or beliefs are about how you think you can do things. This individual is qualified, they have a need, and there's a program set up for them, so fuck you, get the hell out of here. It's that bad. You need that, and we don't have that in America. But that's a whole nother thing. I'm not going to get into that discussion. So and also what that type of punishment, like they did with this woman, and they took away her daycare assistance, what that reveals is that in a capitalist system, there are no quote-unquote off limits to human rights or quote-unquote safe boundaries under capitalism. So it really throws everything to the wind, and it kind of spins the whole thing on an end so that there's no real orientation to what is a right or what is basic human needs or what is a reward, because they do it like that. They clump it all together, basic human rights with reward systems of money as measurement in capitalism. So capitalism practices this type of punishment again and again because assisting her, that woman we spoke of, assisting her with childcare is considered a reward under capitalism and not a basic human need, just like I talked about. Even in cases involving food, healthcare, housing, medical treatment, and a safe environment, I've witnessed as an American citizen that American capitalism will deny these rights under the rules of monetary rewards under capitalism. Again, that goes back to saying, well, if it's a purchasable item, if it's something or a purchasable service, then it gets measured in a capitalist system and not measured under human or basic rights. And when you measure essential human requirements under a capitalist system, that's where you got a big problem. It's like using math to solve spelling or something. It's not a formula that's created for that. You can't use capitalism to judge rights and wrongs and needs and wants in other systems. They don't mix. It doesn't work that way. So yeah, and you have to understand that human rights, basic human needs, are not rewards as regard under capitalism, like I just talked about. Access to water, clean air, food, healthcare, exercise, family, religion, freedom, being able to go to the bathroom. These are innate characteristics of the human species that make up our lives. So in other words, these are the things that we need daily to remain alive and healthy. Now, capitalism, quote-unquote, sells you these things as a quote-unquote reward under its program of right or wrong, wealthy and poor system. All right, so if you broke a rule or law under capitalism, capitalism allows leaders to remove any one of those human requirements that I spoke of as basic human rights. Water, access to water, food, healthcare, etc., those things. So if you break law, Capitalism allows leaders to remove any one of those human requirements, as I mentioned, and then what it does is it offers to sell it to you conditionally based on your willingness to conform and support a capitalist system. So let's say you're arrested without cause and you're jailed and you're prosecuted. If the law was in error in arresting you, in other words, you didn't do anything wrong and they made a mistake, now you learn that your freedom was removed and that to get it back, you must buy, B-U-I, just like when you go to the store, purchase, give money, you must buy it under capitalism's value system, your freedom. If you want it back, it's been taken away, you can have it again, so you have to purchase it now. So remember, freedom under capitalism isn't a right, it's a purchased quote-unquote reward, because it's a service and they put a price on it, so then they measure it in a capitalist system. And the law will test your standing in the capitalist system, in other words, your rank in the capitalist system, which we know is your wealth. It will test it by seeing if you can purchase back, let me just scroll down here, purchase back your freedom, or if you're going to succumb to the system, which is what happens to most people. In the United States of America, there are real legal cases of men that have been sitting for 40 years incarcerated that quote-unquote succumbed, like I said, to a capitalist system because they couldn't afford to quote-unquote buy back their freedom. Under capitalism's rules, so before I talk about that, let's just re-look at that statement there. In the United States of America, there are real legal cases of men sitting 40 years incarcerated that have succumbed to a capitalist system because they couldn't afford to buy back their freedom. And those are real cases. You can go across the United States, look under courts, look up the records. You know, it comes down to, in those cases, if those individuals had been wealthy, they would not have sat in the penal system for those periods of time. I'm making that as a statement, but I think that's probably could be easily argued as a fact by anybody who's has more experience in education than me with the law or with just education in general. Would probably state that that was more of a fact in my opinion, but I'm just saying it as my opinion. But those individuals, in my opinion, would not have served that length of time had they been wealthy. So they could have bought their freedom, or they could have accelerated the process, the American legal process, to do what came about in the end anyway. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that same point at the closing part of this discussion. Now, under capitalism's rules, a 40-year wrongful conviction error that, just like I mentioned, the person who did nothing wrong and they were still incarcerated. Under capitalism's rules, a 40-year wrongful conviction error is acceptable as well as a non-punishable offense by the state or government. And that's what you see. You never see a case where someone was set free and the judge who decided that case is punished or removed or incarcerated. You don't see that with the police officers. Yes, you might see some elements to that, various watered down versions if it's a real obvious situation. Like I remember seeing in the news not that long ago one case where a police officer or a group of police officers, I think it was on the East Coast, were planting false evidence on people that they were stopping or arresting, and that went on for some time through. I think it went on through the half or more of one of the officers' careers when they look back at cases. So, at his cases that he held, that he dealt with. So, in those cases, it's going to be more clear and cut. So when they reopen those court cases and decide that these individuals were wrongfully convicted, then they may punish the police officer. But even in a case like that, it's not going to amount to the same kind of punishment that an American citizen would receive if they did a similar type of infraction. because you know, the legal system protects itself at all costs, but it doesn't protect you. Not under capitalism, anyway. So, and as I said, they're not. It's acceptable for the legal system to do that to people because they have and they continue to do it, to incarcerate wrongful convictions, and it's not a punishable offense to the authority that does that, just like I said. But if you disagree, if you think what I say is not true, then you'll be next, and the rest of us will make an appointment now for 40 years from today, and we'll make an appointment to sit down and talk with you again after you get out of release from your wrongful conviction. And we will come to you, and I will quote what we will say, quote unquote, "Thank you for doing your patriotic part under capitalism. You obeyed well. Thank you." That's what you'll receive after 40 years when it happens to you. So if you disagree, go ahead and give that a shot and see if you like that. So those are my points that I wanted to discuss, and I'm just going to close this discussion now, and just a few thoughts, which is to remember that capitalism rewards the few at the expense of the many. That's the core of capitalism. If you receive any benefits as a person of the many, any luxuries, any material things under capitalism, then realize you're only receiving a fraction of what capitalism's leaders are getting under capitalism. As a citizen under capitalism, your role to play is to uphold the political system that benefits those few. You may have some things, some freedoms, and some luxuries, but the price you pay is high, and the facade you live is deadly. Believing in freedom, or believing in, quote, freedom, justice, equality, and human rights, unquote, which are all facades under capitalism, unless you're rich. So you get a lot of things sold to you by the proprietors, leaders of capitalism. They'll sell you a lot of ideas, democracy, freedom, whatever. But as I said earlier in the discussion, those things are only upheld or come true when when money talks. They're not things that are given to people who are considered, a number in the capitalist system, a part of the contributor as a slave, as you might want to call it, in the system. So that's my talk today about capitalism and the points that I've experienced and seen with it, and maybe you've gotten something out of that, maybe you haven't, but anyway, this is Dub Crank, and I want to thank you for listening to this discussion today, and hope you have a great day. Thank you.